Imagine closing your eyes for the last time, not as the person you were, but as a ghost already condemned. Not as a queen, but as a thing, a spectacle. They didn't just take her crown. They took her name, her hair, and her very self. The things they did to Marie Antoinette before that blade fell were far more terrifying than the guillotine itself. The air inside the dark cell was thick and cold, smelling of stale bread and fear. It was a prison called the Conciergerie, a terrible name for a terrible place. Marie Antoinette, once the most powerful and bright woman in France, sat on a wooden stool. She was not a queen anymore. She was citizen Capet, a prisoner, a name that meant nothing. The change had been slow, then fast like a fever that spikes suddenly. First, they took her husband, King Louis XVI. Then they took her children. Now they had taken her private self. In the palace, she had silk gowns and jewels. She had ladies to dress her, and hundreds of servants to answer her every wish. Now, she had one heavy dress, damp and gray, and two rough guards who watched her every move. There was no privacy left, no escape. Her old life felt like a dream she couldn't quite remember. She was Marie Antoinette, born an Archduchess of Austria, daughter of an empress. She came to France as a girl of 14, full of life, laughter, and dazzling color. She loved music, dancing, and fashion. Her vibrant spirit was meant to bring joy to the French court. But the people of France, hungry and tired of the royals' waste, saw her light as a cruel insult. They hated her extravagance, her foreign ways, and everything she stood for. The vibrant Archduchess was slowly replaced by the image of Madame Deficit, the woman who spent France into ruin. In this damp cell, that vibrant girl was gone. All the color had been drained out. The guards were not just there to keep her locked up. They were there to dehumanize her. They treated her like an animal in a cage, not a former queen. When she slept, they watched. When she ate, they watched. They never spoke kindly. They never showed respect. They wanted her to feel like nothing. And slowly, terribly, it began to work. Every action was a reminder that her royal identity was utterly gone. They had taken her personal belongings, even the small, meaningful things like letters and lockets. They searched her clothes often, roughly. It was not just about security. It was about public humiliation. They wanted the world to see that the great Queen of France was now a helpless woman who could be touched, searched, and controlled by anyone. This was the true horror, worse than the cold stone walls. The thought of her children was the only thing that kept her mind from breaking completely. She didn't know where they were or if they were safe. This emotional torture was constant. Every morning, she woke up, not to the sun and the sounds of the palace garden, but to the reality that she was alone, waiting for a verdict she already knew. She was no longer fighting for her life. She was fighting to keep her soul from shattering. The people who ruled France now wanted to prove that the queen was nothing special, just a bad woman who deserved to die. But in that small, shadowed cell, Marie Antoinette, the frightened young woman, tried desperately to hold onto the memory of the Archduchess who once charmed Europe. The morning of the trial was a day without sunlight. It felt heavy, filled with a deep, chilling silence inside the prison walls, which was soon broken by the rising roar of the city outside. Marie Antoinette knew what the noise meant. The people were gathering. They were waiting for their spectacle. The guards came for her early. There were no pleasantries, only commands. They did not bring her a grand gown or help her with her hair. Instead, they watched her closely as she adjusted her one simple, heavy dress. This was the clothes she would wear to face her judges and, eventually, her end. In a cruel act of final indignity, they did not allow her a proper private carriage. She was to be transported like the commonest criminal. She remembered another journey years ago, when she first arrived in France as a bright-eyed teenage bride. That day, she had ridden in a golden carriage, covered in velvet and polish, pulled by powerful white horses. The streets were lined with people, smiling and waving, shouting "Vive la Reine! Long live the Queen!" That memory felt like it belonged to another person, a character in a fairy tale long since finished. Now, she was led out of the conciergerie and toward a simple, rough cart. It was uncovered, a basic wooden box on wheels. This was not a carriage for royalty. It was a cage for public viewing. The moment she stepped into the open air, the sound hit her. It wasn't the welcoming cheer of the past. It was a crashing, terrifying wave of hate. Thousands of voices merged into one giant, ugly scream. "The Austrian!" they yelled. "Down with the tyrant! To the guillotine!" The guards pushed her roughly onto the cart. The motion began. Slowly, agonizingly, the grim parade started to move through the narrow Paris streets. The purpose of this trip was not simply transportation. It was a performance. The revolutionary leaders wanted every citizen to see the fall of the monarchy personified in this one woman. They wanted her humiliation to be complete. Marie Antoinette sat stiffly, trying desperately to hold her head high. She could feel every eye on her, every breath, every cruel word. People pressed close to the cart, some spitting or throwing small bits of rubbish. She saw faces twisted by anger, faces of men and, most painfully, faces of women, young and old, who should have understood the pain of a mother. The contrast was absolute. She was used to seeing adoration, or at least polite deference. Now, she saw only rage, born from years of poverty and resentment. She was the symbol of everything they had suffered. Every diamond she once wore, every costly hairstyle she adopted, was being paid for now in this terrifying march of shame. She tried to look straight ahead, to find a point beyond the crowd, to retreat into the privacy of her own mind. But the eyes dragged her back. The worst part was not the noise, but the feeling of being utterly exposed. Her fear was public property. Her weakness was a celebration for her enemies. The noise would not stop. It followed the cart like a tide. She realized that this parade was designed to finish the job the prison started, to strip her of her human dignity before she even reached the courtroom. She was no longer Marie Antoinette. She was a condemnation walking, a tragedy on wheels, forced to witness her own destruction. She prayed for the court to start, just to get off this terrible street. The wooden cart finally shuddered to a stop outside the Palace of Justice. The guards quickly rushed Marie Antoinette from the roaring madness of the street into the cold, stone silence of the courthouse. The abrupt change was almost dizzying. One moment, she was surrounded by screaming hatred. The next, she was walking through vast, echoey halls that smelled of dust and old power. She was led directly into the courtroom. It was enormous and intimidating, designed to make anyone standing before the judges feel small and powerless. The judges, wearing dark, official robes, sat high up on a raised platform, looking down on her like gods. Below them were the rows upon rows of spectators, the public gallery. These people were not distant, polite observers. They were packed in tightly, their faces hard, their eyes burning with intense curiosity and satisfied hatred. They were the voice of society, and that voice was saying, "You are already guilty." Marie Antoinette stood alone in the center of the room. She was trembling inside, utterly exhausted by the long imprisonment and the terrible journey. Yet, she found a sliver of strength. She knew she could not beg. She could not weep. She was determined that she would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing the Queen of France break completely. She held her tired body straight, her chin slightly raised, trying to project a dignity she barely felt. As the proceedings began, she quickly realized the chilling, tragic truth. This was not a trial. It was a sentence. The outcome had been decided long ago, the moment the revolution succeeded. The judges were not seeking justice. They were simply performing a required act before the final curtain. The chief prosecutor stood and began to read a list of charges. They were long, dramatic, and often completely unbelievable. She was accused of wasting France's money on silly things, of sending secrets to Austria, and even of terrible, unthinkable crimes against her own family. Every word was a lie twisted into a weapon. She tried to answer some of the charges, to explain, but her voice was weak and lost in the room. The judges barely listened. They had stopped seeing her as a woman capable of truth or lies. They saw only the hated symbol. The deepest, most profound horror was the feeling that she was facing not just a few judges, but the entire weight of a society that had condemned her before she even stepped into the cell. Every spectator's fixed stare, every judge's cold refusal to listen, hammered home the truth. She was already dead. She was a young woman, frail and frightened, standing against the anger of a whole nation. The courtroom was the complete opposite of her life. In Vienna, she was the bright archduchess. In Versailles, she was the queen of fashion. Here, she was nothing more than citizen Capet, a political object that needed to be erased. The tension between the formal judicial process and the raw, hungry emotion of the spectators made the air heavy, illustrating the terrible, rigged reality of her situation. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, trying to find the strength to face the next accusation, knowing that no words she spoke could change the verdict already written in the collective heart of France. The trial had been a long, painful blur of accusations and cold legal formalities. Marie Antoinette maintained her composure through the insults about her spending and the charges of treason. But then, the prosecutor, a harsh, unforgiving man named Fouquier-Tinville, introduced the most unspeakable charge. He brought up her son, the young Dauphin, and accused her of terrible, monstrous crimes against him. It was a vile lie, designed not just to convict her, but to destroy her reputation forever. The lie struck her harder than any blow. Until now, she had been fighting for her life. Now, she was fighting for her honor as a woman and a mother. All the composure she had carefully built up shattered. She pushed herself up from her chair, her body trembling with fury and pain, forgetting the judges entirely. She looked past the high platform and the stern judges. Her eyes swept over the crowded public gallery, searching for the faces of the women, the mothers, who sat there, watching her destruction. Her voice, usually thin from lack of use and food, found a sudden, strong, desperate power. I have not replied to that charge, because nature refuses to answer such a vile accusation made against a mother, she cried out. Her words were not directed at the court. They were aimed straight at the heart of every woman listening. She wasn't defending the queen. She was defending the mother. She pleaded, using the language of shared experience, the universal pain of motherhood. She spoke about her children, ripped away from her. She appealed to their common humanity. I appeal to all mothers present here. It was a brilliant, spontaneous, and dangerous move. For a brief, powerful instant, the cold logic of the revolution and the roaring hatred of the crowd stopped. The spectators were used to seeing a symbol of hated royalty. But in that moment, they saw only a woman, a mother, accused of something so evil that her very soul was crying out against it. Her raw, honest pain cut through the political lies. The women in the gallery, many of them poor, many of them having lost children themselves, looked at her, and the hate began to melt into recognition. Whispers rose in the gallery, not of anger, but of doubt and even pity. Some women started to weep quietly. They were momentarily confused. The tyrant they were supposed to despise looked exactly like a heartbroken mother. This sudden shift was terrifying for the judges. A moment of empathy could derail the entire political trial. The revolution needed Marie Antoinette to be a monster, not a human being. The chief judge, sensing the crowd slipping out of their control, slammed his gavel down fiercely. The loud crack echoed through the sudden silence. He shouted at her, demanding that she address only the court, reminding her that she was there as a political enemy, not as a woman seeking comfort. The moment of human connection was violently crushed by the state. The judge's harsh command returned the atmosphere to cold formality. The spectators quickly remembered their duty to hate the queen, and the hateful noise began to creep back. But for those few seconds, Marie Antoinette had proven that the woman inside the royal shell was real, and her agony had touched the hearts of the people who were supposed to be her greatest enemies. That flicker of human understanding was a victory, even as the final verdict loomed. After the powerful emotional moment of Marie Antoinette's plea to the mothers, the judges worked hard to stop the wave of sympathy. The chief judge, his face red with anger, made sure the court returned to strict order. The trial, which had briefly become a human drama, was now slammed back into a cold, political machine. From that moment on, the defense lawyers, who had been weak from the start, chosen for show rather than skill, were practically silenced. The judges clearly didn't want to hear another word that might waste time or, worse, stir the emotions of the crowd again. The prosecutor finished his closing statement quickly, not with legal points, but with furious political fire. He spoke about the glory of the Republic and the necessity of destroying all symbols of the past. Marie Antoinette was simply the biggest, most hated symbol. The tension in the courtroom was thicker than ever before. There was a visible clash between the cold law demanded by the judges and the hot emotion that had briefly flared among the spectators. The judges ignored every defense offered. The only thing that mattered was the political outcome. It was clear to everyone present that the trial was a performance for the public, not a search for truth. Finally, the judges sent the jury out to deliberate. The word deliberate felt like a cruel joke. Everyone knew the jury, chosen from the most extreme revolutionaries, had the answer written in their minds before the trial even began. They were gone for only a short time, a surprisingly brief period, confirming the certainty of their decision. Marie Antoinette was led back to the center of the courtroom to hear her fate. The room became deathly silent. Every single person leaned forward, waiting for the one word that would decide her life. She stood straight, her hands clasped, her eyes focused on the jury foreman. She was pale, exhausted, but completely still. This stillness was perhaps the most powerful act of defiance she had left. The foreman rose. His voice was loud and clear as he delivered the verdict on all the charges. Guilty. A huge, triumphant roar immediately erupted from the sections of the gallery filled with the most radical revolutionaries. They cheered wildly, throwing their hats in the air, celebrating the death of the queen. But beneath the celebratory noise, a strange quiet fell over the area where the mothers had been sitting. They did not cheer. They just stared, some covering their mouths, seeing the tragic reality of what they had just witnessed. The systematic destruction of a frightened young woman. Then the foreman pronounced the sentence, death. Marie Antoinette did not cry. She did not fall. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the sound of her own condemnation. The realization was absolute. The system had won. The woman had lost. She was instantly surrounded by guards who hurried her out of the courtroom. The swiftness of her exit showed the judges' fear. They didn't want another outburst, another moment of human weakness to ruin their political victory. The tragic reality was sealed. She had been condemned, not by justice, but by the relentless, unforgiving force of history. The guards wasted no time. As soon as the word death was pronounced, Marie Antoinette was rushed from the courtroom and thrown back into the dark stone of the Conciergerie. Her time was now measured in hours, not days. The long, terrifying journey was almost over, but the final, most personal insults were still to come. She was given no peace. A revolutionary priest was sent to offer her last rites, but she knew he was there for show, a political tool. She politely refused him, choosing to face her God alone with dignity. She sat down and began to write her last letter, a final, heartbreaking message to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth, the only member of her family she knew was still alive. It was a desperate attempt to gather her last thoughts, her final love, and wrap it all up in words. But even this private, sacred act was watched by the omnipresent guard, destroying any chance of a peaceful farewell. The most profound moment of dehumanization came with the sunrise on October 16, 1793. The executioner arrived. The first insult was the haircut. Marie Antoinette's hair had been famous, long, blonde, and once styled in towering, elaborate ways that were the envy of Europe. Now the executioner was there to take it, not gently, but with a purpose. It had to be cut short, almost shaved, to ensure the guillotine blade would fall quickly and cleanly, without getting caught. The sound of the rough shears slicing through her hair was a cruel, final act. It was the complete removal of her femininity and her status. When he was done, she looked like a broken soldier, her head bare, utterly exposed to the world. Next, they changed her clothes. Gone were the simple, respectable black garments she had worn in prison. They dressed her in a coarse, rough white cotton shift, the traditional dress of those condemned to execution. White was the color of innocence, but in this context, it was a symbolic garment, making her look stark and isolated against the gray world. It was a visual declaration that she was no longer a person of rank, but a nameless victim waiting for the knife. Finally, they bound her hands. They tied her wrists tightly behind her back with a coarse rope. This final physical restraint was unnecessary. She was not going to run, but it served the cruel purpose of making her completely helpless. She could not adjust her dress, wipe her eyes, or offer a final wave of thanks or farewell. Her hands, which had once held the scepter of France, were now bound like a criminal's. The pain of the tight ropes was a final, burning reminder that she was no longer in control of her own body. She was led out of the prison and back towards the waiting cart. The journey would be the same as before, only worse. She was no longer just the queen on trial. She was the queen defeated. With every step of the final, short walk to the street, Marie Antoinette, the frightened young woman, tried to find a final, quiet strength within herself. She had been stripped of her name, her hair, her clothes, and her freedom. All that remained was her soul, and she held onto that fiercely, determined to face the crowd and the blade with the last shred of dignity she possessed. The final chapter of Marie Antoinette's life began the moment she was pushed out of the prison gates and onto the waiting tumbril, the simple death cart. She was a devastating sight. Her once magnificent hair brutally shorn, her body wrapped in the rough, white shift, and her hands painfully bound behind her back. This was not the entry of a queen into her city. It was the final, tragic exit of a condemned woman. The street was an ocean of people, far more crowded and loud than the day of her trial. This time, there was no pretense of justice, only a raw, hungry desire for revenge. The crowd roared with a triumphant, joyful malice. They shouted insults about her past and cheered for her death. This ride was meant to be the final public payment for all the perceived sins of the monarchy. Marie Antoinette sat stiffly on the hard wooden bench, her back held straight against the jarring bumps of the cart. She looked frail, but her pale face held a remarkable composure. She refused to meet the eyes of the most vicious spectators, instead choosing to look straight ahead, toward the center of the square where she knew the scaffold stood waiting. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her weep. As the cart moved slowly through the city, her eyes passed over familiar buildings, parts of Paris she had once ruled over, places she had ridden through in golden splendor. A sudden, deep pang of grief struck her when they passed a certain street corner, or perhaps the site of the Tuileries Palace, where she had been held captive. It was a silent moment of realization. The past was truly gone, and her children were lost to her forever. This internal pain was far sharper than any physical restraint. Finally, the cart rattled to a halt in the vast, open space known as the Place de la Révolution. Today, the Place de la Concorde. In the center stood the ultimate towering symbol of the new France, the guillotine. It was tall, painted red, and shockingly clean, dominating the square. Its very presence was a chilling promise of speed and finality. The noise of the crowd reached a deafening climax. Marie Antoinette was helped, or rather pulled off the cart. The most difficult part was the climb up the wooden steps to the platform. With her hands tied, every step was an awkward struggle. As she reached the top, she faltered slightly, accidentally stepping on the executioner's foot. In that final, fleeting moment of human instinct, even as she stood on the brink of death, the manners of the old world resurfaced. She spoke her last known words. "Monsieur, I beg your pardon. I did not do it on purpose." It was a strange, powerful, and final moment of grace. A polite apology to the man who was about to end her life. The crowd, momentarily stunned by the small, gentle human gesture, quieted slightly. The executioner quickly guided her toward the lunette, the wooden collar that held the neck. She was forced onto the plank, secured quickly, and shoved into place. The crowd held its breath. The moment of anticipation was a terrible silence that crushed the massive square. Then, with a dull, heavy thud, the blade fell. The immense roar that followed was the sound of a revolution fulfilling its most savage desire. The executioner lifted the severed head, showing it to the victorious mob. The people cheered, waved, and danced. The queen was gone. The symbol was destroyed. But in the midst of the chaos, the tragic reality remained. A frightened young woman, stripped of everything, had met a political end. The horror was complete, and the sound of the celebrating crowd was the final, terrible full stop on her life.